But will you at least acknowledge that Donald Trump tried to block the peaceful transfer of power? That's never happened before. If he'd had his way, there wouldn't have been a peaceful transfer of power. And that's my point. These guardrails are now gone. Don't forget, 2 weeks before the election, he ordered Bill Barr to arrest Joe Biden. I mean, people forget of what tried to happen, and you folks are just shrugging it off like it's no big deal. Don't worry, it'll be fine.
Dave, like literally, Donald Trump has been prosecuted by Joe Biden. Joe Biden is
we're talking about blocking. This is all stuff.
Okay, Dave, you know what? I thought we were going to have Mandy to talk about the EPA, to talk about energy policy. I think we're getting derailed here, in my opinion.
Well, this is an important thing.
It is. I agree. It's important. Can I say one other thing, Dave? There's something please. we do actually agree on, and it is the role of Congress. And actually, like segueing it back into my book, my argument is overall you should have a smaller administrative state, and Congress should actually be more powerful. I was looking into this. I wrote an op-ed that I'm going to submit in a couple days. But if you look at just from a budgetary perspective, and remember, the legislative branch between the House and the Senate, that is the voice of the American people in the policy making process. And over time, that voice has been diminished by the growth of administrative agencies that have billion to $100 billion budgets. Whereas if you look at Congress, all of Congress, the legislative branch alone, they have tens of $billions budget. That's not the best way to really paint the picture. I think the best way is the number of total full-time employees. You have 2.9 million full-time employees across the federal workforce. The legislative branch includes around 32,000 total, and a lot of that includes people who engage in non-policy making actions. But Congress is charged with oversight of the administrative state. How in the world is a small handful of tens of thousands of people at best going to perform adequate oversight to keep the administrative state in check when you have agencies that continually take actions that go beyond their legal mandates? EPA is ground zero for this type of activity. And they even ignore very clear decisions from the Supreme Court time and time again, or they pursue political goals versus instituting and implementing actions consistent with their stated mission. So if we want to get back, I would actually charge, we don't need to get back to the days of Reagan. We need to get back to the days of the founding principles of a constitutional republic that is consistent with checks and balances that are so important. And as the administrative state has grown over time for a number of actions, that balance has gotten out of whack, ultimately diminishing the role of the individual and degrading individual rights that are so important to our constitutional republic.
Well, let me just add one thing to that, because I think we agree on that. But people like George Will, by the way, have been saying for years that the legislative branch has been voluntarily ceding power to the executive branch. Okay, so we agree on that. Secondly, the Supreme Court has also muddied the waters. Now, we can have an honest debate on the merits or what the true impact of that immunity ruling is, but I think most people who are objective say, the Supreme Court shouldn't have even taken the case, and if they did, at the very best way you can spin it is they've made it much more ambiguous. And they've made it much easier for the president to try to push the limits of the line, because you can say that anything is under the guise of executive power. So a lot of and then the court wonders why their reputation is at all-time low. So this has been, and it's been a great mystery to me why these two other branches have voluntarily ceded power to the executive branch. But again, if you folks are talking about, paring back the state, I have a feeling that you might be referring to Schedule F. Okay, right now the president, just for our viewers, is allowed to replace about 4,000 workers when he or she comes in. We're talking about 50,000 workers, and again, we're not talking about these people. There are probably a few people that you mentioned that are, these so-called deep state. I think the deep state, just to be tangential for a second, is not what Trump says it is, the conspiracy, the deep state is a bureaucracy, and we deal with this the most in California. I mean, you've got to get 79 different permits to build a building in San Francisco. That's the deep state. But putting that aside, okay, I think that the branches are liable to this, but that still doesn't change our basic argument that he's wiser. He has a bunch of enablers. I mean, you think about people, instead of Rex Tillerson and John Kelly, we're going to have Michael Flynn and Kash Patel. And if that doesn't strike just a sheer shudder down people's spines, I don't know what does. So that's what we need to talk about. I think that people are just sweeping that under the carpet.
Yeah, well, I would say there are a lot of people that worked in the first Trump administration that are geared up and ready to go and work in the second. And me personally, you could characterize me in that group of folks. I'm not intending to go back. I live in Mississippi now. I've left DC, and I'm building my solid rock foundation down south for a lot of reasons. Two of them being my young children, that I want to be more involved in their lives. But I think that there is a learned wisdom, and early on in the administration, there was a lot of lost time. Looking at EPA, I can speak personally about EPA. The early days, we lost a lot of time trying to get time. There's something called a stay that you can apply for pending litigation. You tell the court, hey, we're rethinking this regulation. We know there are these pending cases, but if you could just hold off the implementation of it while we fix it in whatever way we think is consistent with the law and technically sound, can you put the litigation in hold? We spent probably 2.5 months of those early days. Those first 100 days are crucially important, trying to get more time. And at the end of the day, the DC Circuit ruled against all of that, and then we were back at square one. So there's things like that procedurally that political appointees didn't learn until you were on the inside looking out versus the outside looking in. So I do think, I mean, this may strike fear in your heart, but I actually think it's a sign of the government acting in the way that it's supposed to, where it is responsive to new leadership, and that leadership is put there by virtue of the American voter. That you are going to actually see these sorts of things implemented much more efficiently because of that learned wisdom, and not taking missteps. And missteps, mind you, the deep state, and when I say that, I'm talking about the entrenched political class and civil servants, mostly housed in Washington, D.C., but the ones that don't see their role as a civil servant, they see it as either instituting their own personal agenda or the personal agenda of a political ideology they're affiliated with, which is not, that's not their role. If someone wants to do that, there's a lot of other roles you could take in DC, but civil servant shouldn't be where you ultimately land. All that being said, the learned wisdom of the first Trump administration, if there's a second one, they're going to be much more efficient. They're going to be ready to go. And the goal, I mean, a goal, I think, is a laudable goal. The Biden administration on day one appointed 2,000 political appointees. That's frankly impressive. And the Trump administration, I think it would behoove them to try on day one to get as many politicals in those various positions to start instituting the various agenda and policies that the president has laid out in a number of applications on the campaign trail.
Do you think that former President Trump is going to respect the outcome of the election? Because you've just talked so much about the will of the voters being important and people's interests being represented in the House of the people and all this, but he clearly didn't, whether it was the fake elector scheme or whether it was trying to hang, saying that he didn't care whether Mike Pence was hanged, because, by the way, J.D. Vance said that he would not have certified the election, so that gives you an idea. And so I guess my point is, do you think he's going to respect the outcome of the election because he's committed not to do that, or he won't commit to do that? And you can always tell when things may not be going so well in a state, because I just heard yesterday that he's complaining that the vote in Pennsylvania is going to be rigged. Heck, he said in 2016 it was going to be rigged because he thought he was going to lose. So is he going to respect the outcome of the election?
Yes.
What proof do you have? He hasn't committed to it. He hasn't done it in the past. There are all these lawsuits that are brewing. He said, like some little kid along with his little sidekick, Mike Johnson, we have a deal. We won't tell you what it is till after the election, but we have a deal. None of that stuff makes you nervous. You think he'll just, you can see him saying, oh, I wish Kamala all the best.
Yeah, I think he
Come on,
will.
come on. Seriously?
He will respect the outcome of the election just like he did in 2020.
Just like he
Where
did in
again,
2020, he
there was
did in
there was a
2020.
peaceful there when there was a
He
peaceful
lost.
transition. There was a
He still
peaceful
won because
transition
he
of power.
lost.
Again, there's a lot of rhetoric. There's a lot of a lot of hypotheticals that didn't ultimately materialize. And I think when it's hard to sometimes sift the
But
truth
he
versus
tried.
the
Will you at
noise.
least acknowledge that he tried to
That
overturn it?
the truth versus the noise, you look at the actions, and what President Trump did is he asked questions. There were a lot of irregularities. Again, I was in Montgomery County, Pennsylvania, and I saw them firsthand, and
But
I had a lot of
nothing that would have
colleagues.
changed the outcome of the election, Mandy. Nothing that would have changed the outcome of the
but
election.
but what he did is he asked questions that the Democrat Party has been asking for forever. Do you think Hillary Clinton ever accepted the outcome of the 2016
Hillary
election?
Clinton, are you serious?
See,
Hillary Clinton, the night of the election, Hillary Clinton conceded. The next morning, Hillary Clinton said, Donald Trump is our president. I mean, you folks are
No,
so
but
detached
even
from reality. You're forgetting what transpired. The next week, Barack Obama had Donald Trump in the Oval Office. I just can't believe that you guys are rewriting history here.
we're not. We're
Did,
reminding you of a
did
lot of the
Hillary Clinton
rhetoric.
concede the night of the election? Yes or no?
But
He
then
did.
what did she do in her actions? She questioned it. She called him an illegitimate president.
But that's all
She
words. She didn't try to actually.
exactly
It's
words
just Mandy.
ultimately don't matter. What happened? There was
Publicly you concede. Okay, that's what our democracy is based on. You have to be able to get up and say that you lost. Hillary Clinton called Trump up the night of the election and conceded. The next morning at a press conference, she said Donald Trump is our president. So yeah, maybe behind the scenes she said I was rooked or it should have worked out better, but
it
in
wasn't. It was on
public when it
national news.
mattered,
And then she
she
initiated the
conceded.
whole Russia investigation via her campaign and the
The whole
dossier and feeded that.
we're not getting in. There's good proof
But
on the
those are the
Russia,
actions.
but
Like
you're throwing these red herrings in here. The bottom line
I
is
don't think it's a red herring.
this
I
is
think it's
the.
very relevant.
But every single time it's like saying, well, Terry McAuliffe said that there were some illegitimate voters, or in 2016, some Hollywood actors said that the electors shouldn't certify the election. That's all talk. That's not trying to undermine a free and fair election. That's not inciting an insurrection. I mean, I got to say, you Trumpsters are just masters of the false equivalency. I mean, it is beautiful. Anyway, Carrie, you say something. I've been doing all the talking.
Well, look, yeah, I think I agree with Mandy, because at the end of the day, on January 6th, which was a horrible day for our country, Trump did say march peacefully.
Oh,
He did not incite anything, Dave. And I know we've talked about this over and over,
please,
but
you can believe that all you
I'd
want.
rather talk about policy, and I'd rather not talk about this anymore, because at the end of the day,
Yeah, because you're losing the argument.
NBC News just came out with new polling on policy proposals, and they asked them their top response to strong support. The question was, are you more or less likely to support a candidate? And they gave different issues. Their top yes was, I'm more likely to support expanding domestic oil and natural gas production.
Correct.
I'm just
and
wondering.
we're pumping more energy now than we ever had. And
Yes.
Joe Biden, by the way, let me just say this because you bring up a very good point. One of my complaints, and has gone to both parties, is it seems like we've had one party that's against fossil fuels, one party that is against alternative energy. I've always said, let's go full speed ahead on both. And Biden very quietly has done that. He's invested more than we ever have in alternative fuels, which I think we need to do. But we're also pumping more oil and gas than we ever have. Now, he can't say it. He can't be very vocal about it because he's going to offend his base, but he deserves credit for that. And by the way, there was a poll that was taken where they asked voters about the issues, not who's supporting it. They said, are you in favor of X? Are you in favor of Y? Are you in favor of Z? And if you took out the candidate, okay, which takes out the tribalism, the partisanship, more people by far supported Biden's policies. But because Biden's been such a terrible messenger, and because people still, and this is to me the biggest worry. If you ask me what's one stat that worries me more than anything about this election, 2/3 of people voting in this election have never experienced inflation. And you ladies, of course, are probably too young to remember it because you're such spring chickens. But for those of us that were alive in the late 70s, we remember 18% inflation. We remember the prime hitting 20% in early 1980. And even though I think 70% of it was supply chains and about 20% of it was Biden's fault and about 10% of it happened during Trump, the bottom line is it doesn't matter. It's personal. It's a gut punch. And that is the thing that I think is hurting Biden more than anything else, because the economy, by all metrics, is doing great. I remember Carrie, on so many times during our show, you said, oh, if we're not in a recession, we're going to be in one soon. We had the so-called soft landing. But the bottom line is perception trumps reality, pardon the pun.
No, but Dave, 20% inflation cumulative over Joe Biden's term.
Yes, and 22% wage increase over Joe Biden's term. So wages have gone up faster than inflation.
No, they haven't.
It doesn't matter. Yes, they have, but I don't want to argue.
It's been
the point is perception.
3%.
Mom feels it at the grocery store. Dad feels it at the gas pump. So, and this is where the administration, by the way, I think has gone wrong. You can't talk to people where you think things should be or where you want them to be or where if your great policies were being appreciated, they would be. You have to talk to people where they are. And that has been a failure of the administration. You know, unlike you, I'm the one who looks at both sides fairly. And I think if they lose, it's going to be because of that. And because I think, we said before, I think Harris made a terrible mistake picking Tim Walz. I think she should have picked Josh Shapiro or a military guy. But if she loses the election, those are the two reasons that she will lose, because this is a very winnable election. And the biggest coalition in this country is the anti-Trump coalition.